The sound of gunfire echoed across the dusty plains as Elizabeth Harper clutched her swollen belly, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't expected to be 7 months pregnant and alone in the unforgiving Texas wilderness of 1876. But here she was, hiding behind a fallen oak as bullets whizzed overhead. The stagecoach that had been carrying her to Laredo lay overturned 100 yards away, its driver dead, the other passengers scattered or worse. Her husband's killers had finally caught up with her. Elizabeth had been running for 2 months now, ever since Thomas had been shot in the back by the Harlow gang for refusing to sell their small Colorado homestead. She had nothing left except the child growing inside her and the desperate hope that she might find safety in Laredo, where Thomas's cousin had promised them sanctuary. Now even that hope seemed lost. As the gunfire ceased, Elizabeth heard the approaching hoofbeats and pressed herself further against the rough bark. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent prayer as her hand moved protectively over her unborn child. The riders passed within feet of her hiding spot, but miraculously continued onward, chasing phantoms in the wrong direction. When silence fell over the plains once more, Elizabeth finally allowed herself to breathe. Night was approaching, and with it, the bone-chilling cold of the Texas desert. With no supplies and no transportation, she began to walk, following the faint trail that she prayed would lead to Laredo. By nightfall, her swollen ankles had given out completely. Elizabeth collapsed beneath a solitary mesquite tree, her vision blurring as exhaustion overtook her. The baby kicked fiercely, as if sensing her distress, and she placed a gentle hand over the spot. "We'll be all right, little one," she whispered, though she hardly believed it herself. The creak of a wagon and the soft nickering of horses roused Elizabeth from her half-conscious state. Her hand instinctively went to the small derringer hidden in her boot, the last gift Thomas had given her. Through the darkness, she made out the silhouette of a wagon approaching slowly along the trail. "Hello there," a deep voice called out. "Anyone need assistance?" Elizabeth remained silent, her fingers tightening around the derringer. After all she'd been through, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. The wagon stopped, and a tall figure jumped down, striking a match that illuminated a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't one of the Harlow gang. She knew their faces all too well, but that didn't mean he wasn't dangerous. "I know you're there, madam," the man said gently. "Saw you from the ridge back yonder. I don't mean you any harm. Name's Quinn James. Most folks call me Quinn." He took a step closer, and Elizabeth drew out her derringer, her hand shaking. "Stay back," she warned, her voice hoarse from thirst. The man called Quinn stopped immediately, raising his hands. "Yes, madam. No need for that. I was just heading back to Laredo and thought you might need help." It's dangerous country to be traveling alone, especially for. His eyes fell to her swollen belly, visible even in the dim light, especially for someone in your condition. "Laredo," Elizabeth whispered, the word catching in her throat. "Yes, madam, about 15 miles south. You headed there?" Elizabeth nodded slowly, still not lowering her weapon. "How do I know you're not with them? The Harlow gang?" Quinn's expression darkened. "Those murderous thieves?" "No, madam, I'm just a rancher. Got a small spread outside of Laredo." He gestured to the wagon. "I've got water, food, and blankets. The nights get mighty cold out here." As if on cue, a shiver ran through Elizabeth's body. The baby kicked again, harder this time, and she winced. Quinn noticed her discomfort and took another cautious step forward. "Madam, I understand your caution, but you need help." "I swear on my mother's grave I mean you no harm. Let me take you to Laredo. There's a doctor there who can make sure you and your child are all right." Elizabeth hesitated, the derringer wavering in her grasp. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her body couldn't take much more. The baby needed her to survive, and right now this stranger represented her only chance. I can't pay you," she said finally. Quinn's face softened into a smile. Wasn't asking for payment, just doing what any decent man would do. After a moment's consideration, Elizabeth slowly lowered the derringer, though she kept it clutched in her hand. "All right," she conceded, her voice barely audible. "To Laredo." Quinn nodded, then approached carefully, offering his hand. She ignored it, struggling to her feet on her own, pride still intact despite her desperate situation. He respected her independence, merely gesturing toward the wagon. "I've got a bedroll in the back you can rest on," he said, climbing up to the driver's seat after she'd settled herself in the wagon bed. As they began to move, the gentle rocking of the wagon lulled Elizabeth into an uneasy sleep, the derringer still clutched tightly in her hand. She didn't know if she could trust this Quinn James, but for now, she had no choice. Quinn glanced back occasionally at the sleeping woman, his brow furrowed with concern. The stagecoach robbery had been the talk of the nearby settlements, but he hadn't expected to find a survivor, let alone a heavily pregnant woman alone on the plains. He clicked his tongue, urging the horses to maintain a steady pace through the darkness. Whatever her story was, it was clear she was running from something or someone, and he had a feeling the Harlow gang wouldn't give up their pursuit easily. By dawn, the outskirts of Laredo came into view, a sprawling town situated along the Rio Grande. The border settlement had grown significantly in the past decade, with the railroad's arrival bringing new commerce and settlers to the once sleepy outpost. As they approached, Elizabeth stirred, sitting up quickly and looking around with wild, frightened eyes. "We're here, madam," Quinn said softly. "Laredo, Texas. Safe and sound." Elizabeth relaxed marginally, taking in the sight of the town coming to life in the early morning light. Quinn guided the wagon down the main street, past the saloon where bleary-eyed patrons were being shooed out by the owner, and toward a modest building with a sign reading Dr. Abernathy Physician. "Best doctor in the county," Quinn explained as he brought the wagon to a halt. "He'll make sure you and your little one are taken care of." Elizabeth eyed the building suspiciously. "I told you I have no money." "And I told you that's not a concern." Quinn jumped down from the driver's seat and approached the back of the wagon, offering his hand once more. This time, exhaustion overcoming pride, she accepted his help. As her feet touched the ground, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, causing her to gasp and clutch at Quinn's arm. His eyes widened in alarm. "Madam, are you all right?" Elizabeth shook her head, her face contorted with pain. "The baby. I think something's wrong." Without hesitation, Quinn swept her into his arms and carried her toward the doctor's office, calling out as he approached the door. "Doc Abernathy, need your help here, urgent." The door swung open to reveal a middle-aged man with spectacles and a neatly trimmed beard, his clothes rumpled as if he'd been sleeping in them. He took one look at Elizabeth and gestured for Quinn to bring her inside. "Put her on the examination table, doctor." Abernathy instructed, already rolling up his sleeves. "When did the pain start, madam?" "Just now," Elizabeth managed through gritted teeth. "But I've been traveling for days. Stagecoach was attacked." The doctor exchanged a concerned glance with Quinn. "The baby might be coming early. Too much stress and exertion can trigger labor." He turned his attention back to Elizabeth. "What's your name, madam?" "Elizabeth Harper," she replied, another wave of pain washing over her. "Mrs. Harper, I'm going to do everything I can for you and your child, doctor." Abernathy assured her, his voice calm and steady. He looked to Quinn. "Mr. James, if you would wait outside." "No." Elizabeth reached out, grabbing Quinn's wrist with surprising strength. "Stay, please." The fear in her eyes was unmistakable fear of being left alone, vulnerable in a strange place. Quinn nodded, his expression solemn. "I'll stay right here, Mrs. Harper. You have my word." "For the next several hours, Doctor." Abernathy worked tirelessly to prevent Elizabeth from delivering her child prematurely. Quinn remained by her side, offering his hand to squeeze when the pain became unbearable, wiping her brow with a cool cloth and murmuring words of encouragement. By midday, the contractions had finally subsided. Dr. Abernathy, looking weary but relieved, announced that the danger had passed for now. "You need complete bed rest, Mrs. Harper," he said firmly. "At least a month, preferably until the baby comes. No traveling, no exertion of any kind." Elizabeth's face fell. "I can't stay here. They'll find me." "Who will find you?" Dr. Abernathy asked. She glanced at Quinn, then back to the doctor. "The Harlow gang. They killed my husband 2 months ago. They've been hunting me ever since." Quinn's expression darkened. "The Harlows don't usually leave witnesses. Thomas, my husband, refused to sell our land to them. They want to control the water rights in that part of Colorado." Elizabeth's voice cracked. "He told them no, and they shot him down right in front of me. I ran. I've been running ever since." Dr. Abernathy shook his head. "Well, you can't run anymore, not in your condition. That baby will come early if you don't rest, and neither of you might survive it." Quinn paced the small examination room, his mind working. After a moment, he turned to Elizabeth. "My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. It's secluded, well protected. You could stay there until the baby comes." Elizabeth stared at him, suspicion warring with desperation in her eyes. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "I know what it's like to lose someone to violence," Quinn said quietly, "and I know the Harlows. They're the scum of the earth, preying on decent folks. If I can help keep you and your child safe from them, that's reason enough." Dr. Abernathy nodded approvingly. Quinn's place would be perfect. It's remote enough that no one would think to look there, and he's got a couple of ranch hands who are handy with firearms should the need arise. Elizabeth closed her eyes, exhaustion evident in every line of her face. After a long moment, she nodded. "All right," she whispered. "But only until the baby comes. Then I need to move on." Quinn met her gaze steadily. "One step at a time, Mrs. Harper. For now, let's focus on getting you and your child through this safely." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Quinn's wagon rolled away from Lerdo, this time with Elizabeth resting on a proper mattress in the back. Surrounded by supplies Dr. Abernathy had insisted they take. The doctor had given her something to help her sleep, and she had finally surrendered to exhaustion. Quinn's ranch appeared on the horizon just as twilight settled over the landscape, a modest homestead with a sturdy main house, a barn, and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands. As they approached, 2 men emerged from the bunkhouse, hands hovering near their sidearms until they recognized Quinn. "Boss, you're back early," called the older of the two, a weathered cowboy named Franklin. "Got a situation, Frank," Quinn replied, bringing the wagon to a halt. He explained the circumstances in hushed tones as the men peered into the wagon bed at the sleeping woman. "The Harlows," Franklin whispered, his expression grim. "They're bad business, boss." "I know," Quinn acknowledged, "but she needs our help. Set up the spare bedroom in the main house, would you? And Pedro, ride into town at first light and ask Sheriff Miller to come out here when he can. He should know about this." The younger ranch hand, Pedro, nodded and headed toward the barn to tend to the horses, while Franklin went to prepare the bedroom. Quinn gently lifted Elizabeth from the wagon, carrying her into the house and to the freshly made bed Franklin had prepared. As he laid her down, her eyes fluttered open briefly. "Thank you," she murmured, before drifting back to sleep. Quinn stood watching her for a moment, struck by the quiet strength in her face even in repose. Then he quietly left the room, closing the door behind him. The next morning, Elizabeth awoke to the unfamiliar sounds of a working ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the nickering of horses, the rhythmic pounding of a hammer. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, followed by a surge of panic. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she remembered where she was. Slowly, she sat up, her hand automatically moving to her belly. The baby was active this morning, its movements reassuring her that despite everything, life persisted. A simple dress had been laid out at the foot of the bed where it had come from. She couldn't guess along with a basin of clean water for washing. After making herself as presentable as possible, Elizabeth ventured out of the bedroom. The main house was modest but well kept, with simple, sturdy furniture and large windows that let in the morning light. She followed the smell of coffee and found Quinn in the kitchen, frying bacon on a cast-iron stove. He looked up as she entered, a smile breaking across his face. "Mrs. Harper." "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Better," she admitted, somewhat surprised to find it was true. "Thank you for your hospitality." Quinn gestured to a chair at the small kitchen table. "Sit, please. You must be hungry. I'm no gourmet chef, but I can manage bacon and eggs without burning them." Usually. Despite everything, Elizabeth found herself smiling as she took a seat. "It smells wonderful." As Quinn served breakfast, she studied him more carefully than she had been able to before. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably in his early 30s, with sun-bronzed skin and laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and though his clothes were those of a working rancher, they were clean and well-maintained. "Where did the dress come from?" she asked as he sat down across from her. "It belonged to my sister," Quinn replied, his expression momentarily clouding. "She isn't with us anymore. Influenza 3 winters ago. I kept some of her things, thought they might fit you." "I'm sorry for your loss," Elizabeth said softly, understanding all too well the pain of losing someone dear. Quinn nodded his thanks, then changed the subject. "I sent for the sheriff. He should be here later today. He needs to know about the Harlows. They're wanted in several territories." Elizabeth's hand tightened around her fork. Will I have to leave with him?" "No," Quinn assured her quickly. "This is still the safest place for you. Sheriff Miller is a good man. He'll want to help." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Elizabeth spoke again. "You live here alone. Besides your ranch hands," Quinn nodded. "Just me. Had a full house once, parents, sister, younger brother. Pa died in the war, ma from a rattlesnake bite, sister from the fever. Brother headed to California 2 years ago. Haven't heard from him since." He shrugged, but Elizabeth could see the loneliness behind the gesture. "Ranch keeps me busy enough not to dwell on it." Before Elizabeth could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew their attention. Quinn rose, his hand automatically moving to the revolver at his hip, and went to the window. "It's the sheriff," he said, relaxing. "And Dr. Abernathy's with him." Elizabeth remained seated as Quinn went to greet the visitors. She heard male voices in conversation, then footsteps approaching the kitchen. Sheriff Miller turned out to be a tall, imposing man with a silver star pinned to his vest and eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. Dr. Abernathy nodded a greeting to her, his kind face a welcome sight. "Mrs. Harper," the sheriff said, removing his hat as he entered. "I'm Sheriff Thomas Miller. Quinn here tells me you've had some trouble with the Harlow gang." Elizabeth recounted her story for the 3rd time in as many days, the pain of reliving Thomas's murder only slightly dulled by repetition. Sheriff Miller listened attentively, occasionally asking for clarification about dates or descriptions. "The Harlows have been operating with impunity for too long," he said when she'd finished. "I've been coordinating with lawmen in Colorado and New Mexico to bring them to justice, but they're slippery. They've got friends in low places and some in high ones too. Are they likely to come looking for Mrs. Harper here?" Quinn asked, voicing the question that had been weighing on Elizabeth's mind. The sheriff considered this. "Hard to say. Laredo's a fair distance from their usual territory, but they're persistent, especially if they think someone can identify them." He turned to Elizabeth. "Could you identify the men who killed your husband in court?" Elizabeth nodded firmly. "Every one of them. Their faces are burned into my memory." Sheriff Miller nodded grimly. "That makes you dangerous to them, but you're safe here for now. Quinn's place isn't widely known, and it's easily defensible." He rose to leave. "I'll send word to the authorities in Colorado, let them know you're alive and under protection. In the meantime, I'll have my deputies keep an eye out for any strangers asking questions in town. Doctor." Abernathy performed a brief examination before departing, declaring that both Elizabeth and the baby seemed to be recovering well from their ordeal. "Continue to rest," he instructed. "No strenuous activity. I'll come check on you in a week, sooner if there's any change in your condition." After they left, an awkward silence fell over the house. Elizabeth, unused to accepting charity, felt the need to make herself useful somehow. "I can cook," she offered, "and mend. I may not be able to do ranch work in my condition, but I can earn my keep in other ways." Quinn looked like he wanted to object, but something in her expression must have conveyed how important this was to her dignity. "The cooking would be much appreciated," he conceded. "Franklin tries his best, but his biscuits could be used as horseshoes." Elizabeth laughed, the sound surprising her. It had been so long since she'd had cause for even the smallest joy. The next few weeks settled into an unexpected rhythm. Elizabeth took over the kitchen duties, much to the delight of Quinn and his ranch hands. Though still wary, she found herself gradually relaxing in Quinn's presence. He was unfailingly respectful, never entering her room without knocking, always giving her space when she needed it, yet somehow always nearby when she felt the weight of her grief and fear most acutely. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the vast Texas sky in spectacular hues of orange and pink. Sometimes they talked about books they'd read, places they'd been, dreams they'd once had. Other times they simply sat in companionable silence, each finding comfort in the other's presence. One such evening, about 3 weeks after her arrival, Elizabeth found herself opening up about Thomas in a way she hadn't been able to before. "We were married 5 years," she said softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Childhood sweethearts. Everyone said we were too young. I was 18, he was 20, but we knew our own minds." She smiled sadly. He was so excited about the baby, had already started carving a cradle. Quinn listened quietly, his expression gentle. "I still can't believe he's gone," Elizabeth continued, her voice catching. "Sometimes I wake up and for just a moment I forget. Then it all comes crashing back." She pressed her hand to her belly. "This little one will never know their father." "They'll know him through you," Quinn said softly. "Through your stories, your memories." Elizabeth nodded, blinking back tears. "Thomas would have liked you," she said after a moment. "He valued honesty and kindness above all else. Said you could tell a man's character by how he treats those who can do nothing for him." "Sounds like a wise man," Quinn replied. "He was." Elizabeth smiled through her tears. "And he would be grateful to you, as I am, for helping us when you had no reason to." Quinn's expression grew serious. "There's always reason to help someone in need, Mrs. Harper. That's what separates us from the likes of the Harlows." The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly enthusiastic kick, causing Elizabeth to gasp and place both hands on her belly. "Are you all right?" Quinn asked, concerned. "Yes," she assured him with a small laugh. "Just an active little one, would you? Would you like to feel?" The invitation surprised them both. Quinn hesitated, then nodded, moving closer on the porch bench. Carefully, Elizabeth took his hand and placed it on the spot where the baby was kicking. After a moment, there was another strong movement, and Quinn's eyes widened in wonder. "That's amazing," he whispered. As their eyes met, something shifted between them, a fragile connection, tenuous but undeniable. Elizabeth withdrew her hand, suddenly conscious of their proximity, and Quinn respectfully moved back to his original position. "Have you thought about names?" he asked, breaking the tension. Elizabeth shook her head. "Thomas and I had discussed a few, but nothing felt right yet. I thought perhaps when I saw the baby." Quinn nodded understandingly. "My ma always said a name should be something a child can grow into, like a good pair of boots." This drew another laugh from Elizabeth, and the moment of awkwardness passed, though the memory of that brief connection lingered in both their minds. The following day brought an unexpected visitor. Elizabeth was kneading dough for the evening meal when she heard the sound of a horse approaching at speed. Quinn, who had been mending a bridle at the kitchen table, was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to his revolver. "Stay inside," he instructed, moving to the window to peer out. His tense posture relaxed slightly. "It's just Pedro, but he's riding hard." Quinn went out to meet his ranch hand, and Elizabeth moved to the window to watch. Pedro was speaking urgently, gesturing back toward town. Quinn's expression grew grave. After a brief conversation, Pedro rode toward the bunkhouse while Quinn returned to the house. "What is it?" Elizabeth asked as soon as he entered, dread coiling in her stomach. "3 strangers rode into Laredo this morning," Quinn said grimly. "Been asking questions about a pregnant widow who might have come through on the stage. Description matches you." Elizabeth's knees weakened, and she gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "The Harlows," she whispered. Quinn nodded. "Sheriff Miller thinks so. He sent Pedro to warn us. He's feeding them false information, telling them you were headed for San Antonio, but it's only a matter of time before they get suspicious." "I need to leave," Elizabeth said, panic rising in her voice. "I can't bring this danger to your door." "You're not going anywhere," Quinn stated firmly. "Not in your condition. Sheriff Miller is gathering a posse to arrest them, but until then, we need to be prepared." Over Elizabeth's protests, Quinn began making preparations for a possible confrontation. The ranch hands were alerted, weapons were checked and loaded, and lookout positions established. By nightfall, the ranch had been transformed into a small fortress. Quinn insisted that Elizabeth sleep in his room that night. It was the most defensible position in the house, with only one window and a solid door. He would keep watch from the main room. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded her. Every creak, every whisper of wind had her starting up in alarm. Sometime after midnight, she heard soft footsteps approaching the door, followed by a gentle knock. "Mrs. Harper, are you awake?" Quinn's voice was barely audible. "Yes," she replied, sitting up in bed. The door opened slightly, and Quinn's silhouette appeared in the doorway. "I thought I heard you moving about. Everything's quiet outside. No sign of trouble." Elizabeth nodded, though her heart was still racing. "I can't seem to calm my mind enough to sleep." Quinn hesitated, then stepped further into the room, leaving the door ajar. "Would it help to talk? Or I could read to you. I have a few books." The thoughtful offer brought unexpected tears to Elizabeth's eyes. "You've done so much already." "It's no trouble," Quinn assured her, moving to sit in the chair near the bed. "What would you like to hear?" "I've got Dickens, some Shakespeare, a volume of Wordsworth." "Wordsworth," Elizabeth decided. Thomas used to read his poetry to me." Quinn retrieved the book from the shelf in the main room and returned to the chair. His deep voice, soft in the darkness, began to recite the familiar verses of "I wandered lonely as a cloud." The familiar words washed over Elizabeth, bringing not pain as she had feared, but a gentle comfort. Quinn read poem after poem, his voice steady and soothing, until at last her eyelids grew heavy and she drifted into sleep. The next few days passed in tense vigilance. Sheriff Miller sent regular updates via Pedro. The strangers were still in Lerdo, growing increasingly impatient with the lack of information. They had been identified as members of the Harlow gang, but without cause, the sheriff couldn't simply arrest them. He needed them to make a move first. On the fourth day, that move came. Elizabeth was in the kitchen, preparing a stew for the evening meal when Quinn burst through the door, his expression grim. "They're coming," he said without preamble. Sheriff Miller's spy in the saloon overheard them talking. "They don't believe the San Antonio story. They're planning to search the outlying ranches, starting with mine." Elizabeth's blood ran cold. "How many?" "3 that we know of," Quinn replied, "but there could be more. Sheriff Miller's gathering his posse, but they won't get here before the Harlows do." He crossed to where she stood, taking her gently by the shoulders. "I need you to hide. There's a cellar beneath the pantry, well concealed. Franklin will show you." "And you?" Elizabeth asked, fear gripping her heart not just for herself and her child now, but for this man who had risked so much to protect them. "I'll be fine," Quinn assured her, though his eyes betrayed his concern. "We're 4 against their 3, and we have the advantage of knowing the terrain. But I need to know you're safe." Before she could respond, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, more intense than anything she had felt before. Elizabeth gasped, doubling over, her hands clutching at her belly. "Elizabeth?" Quinn's use of her first name barely registered through the pain. "The baby," she managed through gritted teeth. "It's coming." Quinn's face paled. "Now, are you sure?" As if in answer, another contraction seized her, forcing a cry from her lips. Quinn's expression shifted from shock to determination. He scooped her into his arms and carried her to the bedroom, calling for Franklin as he went. "Get Pedro to ride for Dr. Abernathy, fast as he can," he instructed when the ranch hand appeared. "And when he gets back, prepare for company. The Harlows are on their way." Franklin's weather-beaten face creased with concern as he took in Elizabeth's condition, but he nodded and hurried out. Quinn gently laid Elizabeth on the bed, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. "What do I do?" he asked, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. Despite the pain, Elizabeth almost smiled at his expression. "Water," she gasped, "clean cloths, and someone who knows what they're doing." "Pedro's gone for the doctor," Quinn assured her, already moving to fetch water. "But it's a hard ride, hour there, hour back at least." Another contraction gripped her, and Elizabeth knew with terrifying certainty that the baby wasn't going to wait that long. When the pain subsided enough for her to speak, she fixed Quinn with a steady gaze. "This baby is coming now, Quinn, before the doctor gets here, before the Harlows arrive." Quinn swallowed hard but nodded. "Tell me what to do. I've helped deliver calves and foals, but never." "The principle is the same," Elizabeth said with a weak attempt at humor, "though I'd appreciate if you didn't refer to me as a heifer." This drew a startled laugh from Quinn, breaking some of the tension. Following Elizabeth's instructions, he gathered clean sheets, towels, and a basin of hot water. He sent Franklin to stand watch while he stayed with Elizabeth, holding her hand through each contraction, wiping her brow with a cool cloth, and speaking words of encouragement. The labor progressed rapidly, too rapidly. Elizabeth thought with concern. The baby was coming nearly a month early, spurred by the stress and fear of recent events. As the contractions grew closer together and more intense, she clung to Quinn's hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. "You're doing wonderfully," he told her, his voice firm despite the worry in his eyes. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Elizabeth Harper." The pain reached a crescendo, and Elizabeth bore down with all her might, a primal scream tearing from her throat. Then, suddenly, there was a moment of blessed relief, followed by the thin, indignant wail of a newborn. "It's a boy," Quinn announced, his voice thick with emotion as he carefully cradled the tiny, squirming infant. "A perfect little boy." Following Elizabeth's breathless instructions, Quinn cleaned the baby, wrapped him in a soft blanket, and placed him in her waiting arms. The sight of her son's face so tiny, so perfect, with a tuft of dark hair just like his father's, brought tears streaming down her cheeks. "Hello, little one," she whispered, counting fingers and toes, marveling at the miracle of him. "You're finally here." Quinn watched them, his expression tender. "He's beautiful, Elizabeth. What will you call him?" Elizabeth looked down at her son, considering. "Thomas, after his father," she decided. "Thomas Quinn Harper." Quinn's head snapped up, surprise evident in his features. "Quinn?" Elizabeth nodded, her eyes meeting his. "You saved us both. I want him to carry the name of a good, honorable man." Before Quinn could respond, Franklin's voice came urgently from outside. "Riders approaching, 3 of them coming fast." The brief moment of joy shattered. Quinn's expression hardened as he rose to his feet. "Stay here," he instructed. "Keep the baby quiet if you can. I'll handle this." "Quinn," Elizabeth called as he reached the door, her voice trembling. "Be careful." He turned back, his gaze intense. "I will protect you both with my life. That's a promise." Then he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. Elizabeth clutched her newborn son closer, listening to the sounds of men positioning themselves, of weapons being readied. Little Thomas, as if sensing the danger, had fallen silent in her arms, his tiny face peaceful in sleep. Outside, she heard the approaching riders slow to a walk, then stop. A man's voice called out, harsh and demanding. "We're looking for a woman. Pregnant widow. Word is she might be staying here." "No pregnant women here," Quinn's voice replied, steady and calm. "Just me and my ranch hands. You wouldn't mind if we take a look around then, would you?" The voice asked, its false friendliness not masking the underlying threat. "Actually, I would," Quinn answered. "This is private property. Unless you've got a warrant, I suggest you move along." A different voice spoke, lower and more threatening. "We don't need no warrant. We're just asking neighborly-like." "And I'm declining neighborly-like," Quinn responded. "Now state your business or leave." The tension in the air was palpable even from inside the bedroom. Elizabeth held her breath, her arms tightening protectively around her son. "You're making a mistake, rancher," the first voice said. "The woman we're looking for is a thief and a murderer, killed her own husband and stole his money. We're just bringing her to justice." "That's a lie." Elizabeth couldn't stop herself from crying out, rage momentarily overcoming fear. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of guns being drawn. "Seems like you've been hiding something after all, rancher," the voice said, now openly menacing. "Send her out and maybe we'll let you live." "That's not going to happen," Quinn replied, and Elizabeth could hear the sound of his revolver being cocked. Last chance to ride away. What followed was a cacophony of gunfire and shouting. Elizabeth curled her body protectively around her son, whispering prayers and promises as bullets splintered the wooden walls of the house. The baby began to wail, terrified by the noise, and Elizabeth tried desperately to soothe him, her own heart pounding with fear. The gunfire seemed to last an eternity, though it was probably only minutes. When it finally ceased, the silence was almost as terrifying. Elizabeth strained to hear any sound, any indication of who had prevailed. Then came footsteps, slow, heavy, approaching the bedroom door. Elizabeth reached for the derringer she had kept hidden beneath her pillow, prepared to defend her child with her last breath. The door creaked open. Quinn stood there, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, his shirt torn and dirty but very much alive. Behind him, Elizabeth could see Franklin, similarly disheveled but standing. "It's over," Quinn said softly. "They won't hurt you again." Elizabeth lowered the derringer, her hands shaking. "Are they?" "Two dead, one wounded and tied up for the sheriff," Quinn confirmed grimly. Pedro arrived with Dr. Abernathy and half the town just as the shooting stopped. Sheriff Miller's already taken the survivor into custody. He moved closer, his expression softening as he looked at the baby. "How is he?" "Frightened by the noise, but unhurt," Elizabeth replied, relief making her voice unsteady. "And you're bleeding." Quinn touched the wound on his forehead dismissively. "Just a graze, nothing serious." His eyes never left the child. "May I?" Elizabeth nodded, and Quinn carefully sat on the edge of the bed, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand with one gentle finger. Little Thomas reflexively grasped it, his whole hand barely encircling Quinn's fingertip. "He's got a strong grip," Quinn observed, wonder in his voice. "Like his father," Elizabeth said softly. Then, meeting Quinn's gaze, she added, "Both of them." Quinn looked startled. "Elizabeth, I'm not." "I know," she interrupted gently. "But you sat with him when he was born, you fought for him before he even drew his first breath. You've done more for him than many blood fathers would." Before Quinn could respond, Dr. Abernathy bustled in, his medical bag in hand. "Mrs. Harper, I hear congratulations are in order, though I wish the circumstances were less dramatic." He turned to Quinn. "Let me see that wound, young man, before you bleed all over the new mother and child." The next few hours were a blur of activity. Dr. Abernathy examined both Elizabeth and the baby, declaring them remarkably healthy despite the premature birth and harrowing circumstances. Sheriff Miller took statements about the Harlow gang, informing them that the surviving member had already confessed to multiple murders, including that of Thomas Harper. "He'll hang," the sheriff said grimly. "And good riddance. The territory's safer without the likes of the Harlows in it." As night fell once more, the house finally emptied of visitors. Dr. Abernathy had insisted on staying in the guest room to keep an eye on the new mother and infant, but everyone else had returned to town, promising to come back the next day to repair the bullet holes in the walls and celebrate the baby's arrival properly. Quinn, his wound cleaned and bandaged, came to Elizabeth's room one last time before retiring to sleep on the sofa. Little Thomas was nestled against his mother's breast, nursing contentedly. "I just wanted to check that you had everything you need," Quinn said softly, his eyes lingering on the peaceful tableau before him. "We do," Elizabeth assured him. "Thanks to you." Quinn shook his head. "You don't owe me any thanks, Elizabeth. I only did what any decent man would do." "No," she contradicted him gently. "You did far more. You took in a stranger, protected her at risk to yourself, delivered her child, and fought off killers to keep them safe. That goes well beyond decency, Quinn James." Quinn looked down, uncharacteristically bashful. "Well, when you put it like that." They shared a smile, the connection between them strengthening in the quiet moment. As Quinn turned to leave, Elizabeth called his name once more. Would you hold him? Before you go, he should know the man who helped bring him into this world." Quinn hesitated only briefly before nodding. With infinite care, Elizabeth transferred the now sleeping infant into his arms. Quinn cradled the tiny boy against his broad chest, his expression a mixture of awe and tenderness. "Hello, Thomas Quinn," he whispered. "Welcome to the world, little man. It's a lot safer for you now." The sight of this strong man holding her newborn son with such gentle reverence brought fresh tears to Elizabeth's eyes. In that moment, she allowed herself to imagine a future she hadn't dared to consider before, a future where she and her son weren't alone, where they were part of a family once more. Quinn looked up, catching her gaze. Something passed between them, an unspoken acknowledgement of possibilities, of hopes not yet voiced but growing stronger with each passing day. "Get some rest," he said finally, carefully returning the baby to her arms. "Tomorrow is the first day of your new life, both of you." As he quietly left the room, Elizabeth settled back against the pillows, her son nestled securely in her embrace. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt the constriction around her heart ease slightly. The road ahead would not be easy, but tonight, at least, she and her son were safe. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were not as alone as she had feared. The weeks following little Thomas's birth passed in a peaceful blur for Elizabeth. Dr. Abernathy had insisted she stay in bed for at least a week, though she had compromised at 5 days, unable to bear being idle any longer. Quinn had been an unexpected godsend during those early days, awkwardly but earnestly helping with whatever was needed, fetching water for washing, bringing meals, even rocking the baby when Elizabeth needed rest. "You're a natural," she had commented one evening, finding Quinn in the main room with little Thomas nestled against his shoulder, sound asleep. Quinn had looked up, a mixture of pride and embarrassment on his face. "He makes it easy. Quietest baby I've ever known." "Only when you're holding him," Elizabeth had replied with a small smile. "He fusses for me and Dr. Abernathy, but never for you." As her strength returned, and the immediate danger from the Harlow gang passed, Elizabeth found herself facing an unexpected dilemma. She had come to Laredo seeking only temporary sanctuary before continuing on to California, where Thomas's cousin had offered them a place to stay. But now, with the baby born and the threat eliminated, she found herself reluctant to leave. The ranch had become a home to her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Quinn had carved out a small corner of the main room as a nursery, building a sturdy cradle with his own hands. Franklin and Pedro had taken to bringing small gifts for the baby: a handmade wooden rattle, a tiny pair of moccasins, a soft blanket purchased from a passing trader. Even the townspeople of Laredo had embraced her and little Thomas, sending food, baby clothes, and offers of help. And then there was Quinn himself. Elizabeth couldn't deny the growing connection between them. It wasn't just gratitude she felt for him anymore, it was something deeper, more complex. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentle strength in his hands as he held her son, the quiet conversations they shared in the evenings after Thomas was asleep, all of it had woven itself into the fabric of her daily life, becoming precious to her in a way she hadn't expected. But guilt plagued her too. Thomas, her Thomas, had been dead only months. Was it disloyal to his memory to feel this stirring of affection for another man so soon? And what of Quinn? He had never spoken of any feelings beyond friendship and concern. Perhaps she was misreading his kindness entirely. These thoughts preoccupied her one sunny afternoon as she sat on the porch, mending one of Quinn's shirts while little Thomas slept in his cradle beside her. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention, and she looked up to see Quinn returning from town earlier than expected. "Is everything all right?" she asked as he dismounted, noting the serious set of his features. Quinn nodded, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "Just some news I thought you should hear right away." He settled into the chair beside her, his expression unreadable. "I ran into Sheriff Miller in town. The trial for the surviving Harlow gang member is set for next month in Austin. They'll need you to testify." Elizabeth's hand stilled on her mending. "I see." The sheriff says they have enough evidence to convict even without your testimony, Quinn continued. So if you don't feel up to it. No, Elizabeth said firmly. I'll testify. I want to look him in the eye when he's sentenced for what they did to Thomas. Quinn nodded, respect evident in his gaze. I'll arrange to accompany you to Austin when the time comes. That's not necessary, Elizabeth began, but Quinn cut her off gently. It is to me. His tone brooked no argument. After a moment of silence, he added, there was something else. A letter came for you from California, from Thomas's cousin, I believe. He handed her an envelope, slightly crumpled from its journey. Elizabeth took it with trembling fingers. This was what she had been waiting for, confirmation that she and her son would be welcome in California, the continuation of the plan she and Thomas had made together. Would you like some privacy to read it? Quinn asked, already rising from his chair. No, Elizabeth said quickly. Stay, please. Quinn settled back as she opened the letter and began to read. Thomas's cousin expressed joy at hearing of the baby's birth and sorrow about the circumstances. He reiterated that Elizabeth and little Thomas were welcome in his home in San Francisco, where he had secured work for her as a seamstress in his wife's dress shop. It was exactly the arrangement she had hoped for when she'd fled Colorado, a fresh start, work that would support her and her child, family connections to help ease the way. Yet as she read, Elizabeth felt a growing sense of dismay rather than relief. Good news? Quinn asked cautiously, noting her expression. Yes, Elizabeth replied, folding the letter carefully. Thomas's cousin has arranged everything as promised. We would be well taken care of in San Francisco. Would be, Quinn caught the conditional phrasing. Elizabeth met his gaze, her heart pounding. Quinn, I don't know if I want to go to California anymore. The words hung in the air between them, charged with unspoken meaning. Quinn's expression remained carefully neutral. May I ask why? He inquired, his voice deliberately casual. Elizabeth looked down at her sleeping son, gathering her courage. Because this feels like home now. Because little Thomas is thriving here. Because... She took a deep breath and raised her eyes to meet his. Because you're here. A silence fell, broken only by the distant lowing of cattle and the soft sounds of the baby's breathing. Quinn's face remained impassive, and for a terrible moment, Elizabeth feared she had misread everything, had embarrassed herself irreparably. Then, slowly, a smile spread across his face, not the polite, restrained smile she was accustomed to, but a full, radiant expression of joy that transformed his features. I was hoping you might say something like that, he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. I've been trying to find the courage to ask you to stay, but it didn't seem right. You came here running from danger, not looking for whatever this is between us. And what is this between us, Quinn? Elizabeth asked softly. Quinn leaned forward in his chair, his eyes never leaving hers. I think it might be the beginning of something wonderful, Elizabeth, if you're willing to find out. Elizabeth's heart soared at his words. I am, she whispered. It feels too soon, and perhaps it is, but I can't deny what I feel. Thomas will always be part of you, part of your son, Quinn said gently. Nothing will ever change that, but perhaps there's room in your heart for new love too. There is, Elizabeth confirmed, reaching across the space between them to take his hand. I've found it here with you. Quinn's fingers tightened around hers. I never expected to find someone like you, Elizabeth Harper. From the moment I saw you beneath that mesquite tree, something in me knew you were special, and every day since has only confirmed it. Little Thomas chose that moment to wake, announcing his hunger with a soft whimper that quickly escalated into determined cries. The adults laughed, the intense moment broken but not diminished. Seems he has an opinion on the matter too, Quinn observed as Elizabeth lifted the baby from his cradle. "A very loud one," Elizabeth agreed, settling back to nurse her son. Quinn watched them, his expression tender. "I want you both to stay, Elizabeth. Not out of obligation or gratitude, but because you want to, because this could be a real home for all of us." Elizabeth looked up, meeting his gaze over the top of her son's dark head. "It already is," she said simply. "It already is." The day of the trial arrived sooner than Elizabeth had anticipated. She stood before the mirror in the bedroom that had become hers, adjusting the collar of her best dress, a new one Quinn had insisted on purchasing for her in Laredo, despite her protests about the expense. "You're representing the law-abiding citizens of 3 territories," he had argued. "You should look the part." The dress was a deep forest green, modest but well-made, with a matching jacket that disguised the last vestiges of her post-pregnancy figure. Elizabeth had to admit it gave her a confidence she badly needed for the day ahead. A soft knock at the door preceded Quinn's entrance. He was dressed in his finest, as well a dark suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to distinguished gentleman, though the sun-bronzed skin and calloused hands still marked him as a man who worked the land. "Ready?" he asked gently, his eyes taking in her appearance with undisguised appreciation. Elizabeth nodded, though her stomach was in knots. "As ready as I'll ever be." "You look beautiful," Quinn said, moving to stand behind her at the mirror. "Strong. Like the woman who survived everything thrown at her and came out the other side." Elizabeth smiled at their reflection, she in her elegant dress, Quinn tall and steady behind her, a picture of solidarity and support. "Thank you for everything." In the main room, Franklin's wife Rosa was settling in with little Thomas for the day. The baby, now nearly 2 months old, was alert and curious, his dark eyes following the adults as they moved about the room. "He will be fine," Rosa assured Elizabeth for the 3rd time that morning. "We have raised 5 children, remember? Your little one is in good hands." Elizabeth nodded gratefully, leaning down to press a kiss to her son's forehead. "Be good for Rosa," she whispered. "Mama will be home soon." The journey to Austin took most of the morning, with Quinn driving the wagon while Elizabeth alternated between rehearsing her testimony in her mind and fighting waves of anxiety. Quinn seemed to sense when her nerves were getting the better of her, filling the silence with stories of his own childhood or pointing out interesting landmarks along the way. Austin was larger and more imposing than Elizabeth had imagined. The courthouse, a grand stone building that intimidated her with its formality. Quinn kept a protective hand at the small of her back as they climbed the steps, nodding respectfully to Sheriff Miller, who was waiting for them at the entrance. "Mrs. Harper," the sheriff greeted her. "Thank you for coming. The prosecutor wants to speak with you before proceedings begin." The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and instructions. Elizabeth was shown to a small anteroom where she would wait until called to testify, while Quinn was directed to the public gallery. Before they separated, he took her hands in his. "You can do this," he said firmly. "Just tell the truth as you remember it. That's all anyone can ask." Elizabeth nodded, drawing strength from his confidence in her. "I'll see you afterward." The courtroom was packed when she was finally called to the witness stand. Elizabeth kept her eyes fixed straight ahead as she walked down the aisle, not wanting to see the face of the surviving Harlow gang member until she absolutely had to. She took the oath with a steady voice, then seated herself, folding her hands in her lap to hide their slight trembling. The prosecutor was a kind-faced man who guided her gently through her testimony, asking clear questions that allowed her to tell her story in a straightforward manner. Elizabeth described the day the Harlow gang had come to their Colorado homestead, the confrontation over the water rights, and the cold-blooded murder of her husband. "And you are certain the defendant was present at the time of the murder?" the prosecutor asked. Elizabeth finally allowed herself to look at the man in the dock, a scowling, hard-faced individual whose eyes burned with hatred as they met hers. She did not flinch. "Yes," she stated clearly. "He was holding the horses while the others confronted my husband." When Thomas refused to sell, he laughed and said, "Just shoot him, Jeb. We ain't got all day." Her clear, detailed testimony left little room for doubt. The defense attorney made a half-hearted attempt to shake her story, suggesting she might have been mistaken in her identification, or that she had fled because she was somehow complicit in her husband's death. "Sir," Elizabeth responded, her voice steady with righteous anger, "I fled because these men murdered my husband in cold blood, and I was carrying his unborn child. I feared for our lives, and rightly so, as they pursued me all the way to Texas with the intent to silence me permanently." When she was finally dismissed from the stand, Elizabeth felt drained but oddly empowered. She had faced her husband's killer and spoken the truth. Whatever the outcome of the trial, she had done what Thomas would have wanted. Quinn was waiting for her outside the courtroom, his face alight with pride. "You were magnificent," he told her as soon as they were alone. "It's over," Elizabeth said, the realization washing over her with unexpected force. "Really over?" "Yes," Quinn agreed, offering her his arm. "And now it's time to go home." The word home resonated deeply within her. Home, not the Colorado homestead she had fled, not the California refuge she had sought, but the Texas ranch where she had found safety, healing, and the promise of new love. The jury deliberated only briefly before returning a guilty verdict. The judge sentenced the defendant to hang, along with delivering a scathing condemnation of the Harlow gang's reign of terror. Elizabeth received the news with quiet satisfaction rather than joy. No punishment could bring Thomas back, but at least justice had been served. The journey back to the ranch was lighter somehow, as if a weight had been lifted from both their shoulders. Quinn spoke more openly about his hopes for the future, expanding the cattle operation, perhaps adding horses to the ranch's offerings. Elizabeth found herself contributing ideas, suggesting improvements to the house, discussing the possibility of a small kitchen garden. As the familiar silhouette of the ranch appeared on the horizon, Quinn slowed the wagon, turning to her with an unexpectedly serious expression. "Elizabeth, before we arrive, there's something I need to say." Elizabeth's heart quickened at his tone. "Yes, these past months have been transformative. When I found you on the trail that night, I had no idea how completely you would change my life." He took a deep breath. "I know it's soon. I know you're still healing, but I also know what I feel, and I believe you feel it too." Elizabeth remained silent, her eyes locked with his, hardly daring to breathe. "I love you, Elizabeth Harper," Quinn said simply. "You and little Thomas both. And while I would never presume to replace your husband in your heart or your son's life, I hope you might consider allowing me to build something new with you. A family. A future." Tears filled Elizabeth's eyes, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Oh, Quinn," she whispered. "I love you too. I've been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon, but it's true." Quinn's face lit with happiness. "Then will you marry me, Elizabeth? Will you and Thomas make a home with me permanently?" "Yes," Elizabeth replied without hesitation. "Yes, with all my heart." Quinn leaned across the wagon seat and kissed her, then their first kiss, gentle and sweet and full of promise. When they parted, both were smiling, their hearts full of the future stretching before them. The ranch hands had gathered on the porch. Little Thomas passed proudly among them like a treasured mascot. The baby let out a squeal of delight when he spotted his mother, tiny arms reaching for her as she approached. "There's my boy," Elizabeth crooned, gathering him close. Did you miss Mama? Were you good for Rosa? An angel, Rosa assured her, though the twinkle in her eye suggested perhaps some selective memory was at work. Quinn cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "We have an announcement to make," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Mrs. Harper has done me the great honor of agreeing to become Mrs. James." A cheer went up from the assembled ranch hands, with Franklin letting out a whoop that startled the chickens in the nearby coop. "About time, boss," he called, grinning broadly. "We was taking bets on how long it would take you to ask." Elizabeth laughed, leaning into Quinn's side as he wrapped an arm around her and the baby. This was what happiness felt like. She realized not the absence of sorrow or pain, but their transformation into something new and beautiful, like a garden growing from once barren ground. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Lerdo church, with little Thomas cooing in Franklin's wife's arms and half the town in attendance. Elizabeth wore a cream-colored dress that Quinn had ordered special from San Antonio, and carried wildflowers gathered from the ranch's meadows. Quinn, looking both nervous and elated, stumbled slightly over his vows but spoke with conviction when he promised to love and protect both Elizabeth and her son for all his days. "I will," he said, the same words he had spoken when he first held the newborn Thomas in his arms, now expanded into a lifetime commitment. The celebration afterward at the ranch was jubilant, with music and dancing continuing well into the night. As twilight settled over the land, Quinn found Elizabeth sitting on the porch, little Thomas sleeping against her shoulder. "Happy, Mrs. James?" he asked, sitting beside her and taking her free hand in his. "Completely," Elizabeth replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I never thought I could feel this way again. After Thomas died, I believed that part of my life was over forever." "Life has a way of surprising us," Quinn observed, brushing a kiss against her temple. "When I bought this ranch, I thought I'd live out my days as a solitary old bachelor. Now look at me, a wife and son in the span of a few months." Elizabeth smiled, looking out over the land that had become her home. "Do you remember what you said the night Thomas was born? That tomorrow was the first day of our new life?" Quinn nodded. "I remember." "You were right," Elizabeth said softly. "That night changed everything, not just because Thomas was born, but because that was the night I truly began to see a future again. A future with you." Quinn's arm tightened around her shoulders. "And what a future it will be, my love." The years that followed proved the truth of his words. The ranch prospered under their joint care, expanding as Quinn's innovative breeding techniques produced healthier, more valuable cattle. Elizabeth's skilled management of the household accounts and her talent for negotiation with traders and merchants contributed significantly to their growing success. Little Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit. He was joined 2 years after the wedding by a sister, Sarah, and 3 years after that by another boy they named James, after Quinn's father. Elizabeth never forgot Thomas Harper. His portrait hung in their bedroom, and she told their children stories of their brave first father who had loved them before they were born. But her heart expanded to embrace the new love she had found with Quinn, a love that deepened with each passing year, each challenge faced together, each joy shared. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Quinn surprised Elizabeth with a special gift, the deed to the Colorado homestead that had been stolen from her first husband. He had tracked down the current owners, who had purchased it unknowingly from the Harlow gang, and negotiated its return. "I don't expect you'll want to live there again," he said as she read the document with tears in her eyes. "But I thought perhaps someday Thomas might want to know his heritage, the land his father loved enough to die for." Elizabeth touched the paper reverently. "Quinn James, you continue to amaze me," she said softly. "Just when I think I couldn't possibly love you more, you prove me wrong." Quinn smiled, taking her hand. "That works out well because I feel exactly the same way about you, Elizabeth James." Standing on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, the children's toys scattered across the yard, the improvements to the ranch house, the thriving cattle heard in the distance, Elizabeth reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From terror and despair to safety and joy, from a woman afraid to trust to one who had found the courage to love again. And it had all begun with a chance encounter on a dusty Texas trail, with a cowboy who had looked at a desperate, pregnant widow and chosen kindness over indifference, who had held her newborn son and promised protection, who had kept that promise and so many more in the years since. "I will," he had said, and he had. As the Texas sunset painted the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, Elizabeth leaned into her husband's embrace, profoundly grateful for second chances and the unexpected paths that lead to home.